A man drags an Apache woman by the hair through the saloon doors and throws her onto the floor in front of 40 men. Her name is Nadi. She rode 31 miles alone, without food, without rest, to reach a document that could save her entire people from being erased from their own land in 3 weeks. She found it. She is holding it against her ribs so hard her knuckles have gone white. And the man standing over her right now is the one man on earth who needs that paper burned before sundown. Nobody in that saloon moves. 40 men. Not one chair scrapes back. Not one voice rises. They have all made the same silent calculation that this is not their fight, that an Apache woman on the floor of a saloon in 1879 New Mexico is simply the way things are and always have been. And then, from the far corner, a stranger who has been in this town less than 4 hours stands up. He does not know her name yet. He does not know what she is carrying. But he spent 6 years of his life living inside Apache communities, eating at their fires, learning their language, burying their dead beside his own men. And the man holding her by the hair is about to discover exactly what that means. If you have ever watched someone need help, felt that pull rise up in your chest, and then looked around a room and realized you were the only person feeling it, tell me in the comments below. And if this is your first time here, subscribe now, because this channel exists for exactly that single moment, the moment before someone decides whether to stay seated or stand up. Harrow, New Mexico was the kind of town that had stopped asking itself hard questions a long time ago. One street, hard-packed and rutted from wagon wheels, ran the length of it. A saloon, a boarding house, a county office with a flag hanging limp in the heat, a livery at the far end where the horses were treated better than most of the people passing through. It was a town that had made its peace with the way power worked out here, which was to say the man with the most land, the most money, and the fewest witnesses generally got what he wanted, and everyone else learned to look at their boots when trouble walked by. James Colt had ridden into Harrow that morning for nothing more than flour, coffee, and a fresh set of horseshoes. 6 years scouting for the Army across the New Mexico and Arizona territories had rearranged something permanent in the back of his mind, a habit of noticing things whether he wanted to or not. On the ride in, he'd clocked wagon tracks on the eastern road, too fresh, too heavy, the unmistakable signature of a federal inspection party. He'd clocked where those wagons were camped, 2 miles out along the creek. Good grass, long sightlines, the kind of spot a careful man picks when he wants to see trouble coming before it arrives. He filed it away the way he filed away most things, and went about his business, tied his horse, bought his supplies, and settled into the saloon with a cup of coffee he had no real urgency to finish. That was when the doors slammed open. The man who came through them was built the way men get built, when their size has been useful to them their whole working life, and they've long since stopped bothering to be anything but imposing. His name, James would learn soon enough, was Cole, and he had Nadi by the hair, dragging her the last few feet across the saloon floor like she weighed nothing at all. She was Apache. That much was plain in an instant, in her dress, in her bearing, in the fierce and terrible stillness she was holding on to even while being hauled across a public room in front of a crowd of strangers. One arm was pinned to her chest, wrapped around a bundle of papers with the kind of grip that says, "These do not leave my hands while I am still breathing." Cole threw her against the bar rail. She hit it hard, caught herself, and did not go down. He said something low that James couldn't catch from across the room, and whatever she said back made Cole's face twist into the particular shape a man's face takes when he has just been told no by someone he never expected to hear it from. 40 men in that room heard it too, and 40 men decided, individually and in perfect unison, that this was not the day they'd get involved. Cole's grip tightened. Nadi's whole body braced. She was not afraid. James saw that immediately, and it was the thing that moved him more than the violence itself. The fact that fear had already been burned out of her somewhere on that 31-mile ride. What was left was only resolve. Cole raised his hand. James stood up. He didn't shove his chair back for effect. He didn't raise his voice. He crossed the saloon floor at the exact unhurried pace of a man who has already decided how this ends and feels no need to rush toward it. He stopped 6 feet from Cole and said one sentence. "Take your hand off her." Cole turned, sized him up the way a man sizes up an unexpected obstacle. "Sit down, friend. This is government business." "I know what government business looks like," James said. "This isn't it. Walk away before this becomes your problem too. It already is." And then James did something that changed the pressure in that room in a way nobody, including James himself, had planned for. He looked past Cole entirely, straight at Nadi, and spoke to her in halting, imperfect, unmistakably real Apache. He asked if she was hurt. The room went silent in a way it had not been silent even when Cole dragged her through the doors. Because violence against an Apache woman in this town, on this day, was background noise. But a white stranger speaking her language, addressing her as a person rather than as property being disputed, that was something none of the 40 men in that room had a script for. Cole's confidence didn't vanish. Men like Cole don't lose their footing that easily. But it shifted, cracked at the edges, the recalibration of a man who has just discovered a variable nobody warned him about. Nadi looked at James. Something behind her eyes moved, not relief exactly, but the specific, cautious readjustment of someone who has been entirely alone in a hostile place and has just found out she isn't quite as alone as she was 30 seconds ago. "I am not hurt," she said, in English, steady. James turned to Cole. "Her name and her nation are her business. What she took from that county office, she had the legal right to access. Territorial residents have standing access to public land records. That's the law. She's not a territorial citizen. The Territorial Citizenship Act of 1873 says otherwise. Look it up." Cole studied him now, really studied him. "Who in the hell are you?" "Former Army Scout. 6 years in these territories." James gave his name. Something shifted behind Cole's eyes at the sound of it, not recognition exactly, more the dawning awareness that this was a name he'd better carry back to his employer before doing anything else. He stepped back, straightened his coat, gave Nadi one last look, the look of a man marking something for later rather than letting it go, and walked out without another word. The saloon exhaled. James looked at Nadi, still gripping the papers against her chest, like they were the only solid thing left in the world. "You came a long way for something," he said. "Show me what you found." They walked the length of Harrow's main street to the livery, away from the noise, and she laid the document out on the workbench in the slanted afternoon light. James read it once, completely. Then again, slower, and then he went very still. The stillness of a man who has just understood exactly how large the thing in front of him actually is. "Do you know what this does to Edmund Rath?" he asked. "It proves his survey is a forgery. It does more than that. It unravels 8 years of his work. He already knows you have it, which means he's not sending Cole back alone next time." The original 1861 survey had the specific, unmistakable texture of something genuinely 18 years old. The paper yellowed by time rather than treatment. The ink faded unevenly, the way real ink fades across decades of shifting light and humidity. The surveying notation reflecting conventions that predated the standardization of 1869. Conventions James had watched change firsthand during his own years handling land records for the Army. Rath's filing, dated 1878 but claiming to rest on that same 1861 survey, used the newer conventions. A forger's hand remembers what it knows, and what Rath's hand knew was 1869, not 1861. The two documents described the same parcel of land and arrived at opposite conclusions. One excluded the Apache settlement from the sale entirely, with a surveyor's own handwritten notation in the margin. Exempt by order of the territorial commissioner. The other claimed no such exemption ever existed. "My father knew something was wrong," Nadi said. "He studied the government's maps for years. They never matched what Wrath filed. He didn't have the words to prove it. He didn't need the words. He needed this. James tapped the document. But proof that stays in this livery proves nothing. We need to get it in front of someone Wrath can't reach. He told her about the federal wagons camped 2 miles east, about Commissioner Ward, a man with 30 years of reading surveys behind him, and, more importantly, a man who happened to be in this territory purely by coincidence, which meant Wrath had never had the chance to compromise him. You ride east, James said. You find his camp before he breaks it. You show him both surveys. I'll stay here and make enough official noise that Wrath has to answer through his office instead of through Cole's fists. That buys you time. How much time do I need? 2 hours, if he's still in camp. She was already folding the document back along its original creases when the livery door opened again. If you were Nadi in that moment, 30 miles from home with your entire community's future folded into your hands, would you have trusted that plan? Would you have trusted a stranger you met an hour ago? No judgment either way. Because what she decides in the next 30 seconds is the difference between 30 families keeping the only home they've ever known and losing it forever. The man in the doorway was not Cole. He was smaller, better dressed, moving with the composed authority of someone who has never once needed size to make people listen. Somewhere in his 50s, a face that had practiced revealing nothing for so long it no longer had to try. The coat of a territorial land agent. A leather folder held against his ribs the exact same way Nadi held her survey. The grip of a man who understands precisely what he's carrying is worth protecting. Edmund Wrath didn't need to introduce himself. Everything about him already had. I'm glad I found you both together, he said. It will save time. He produced a paper from the folder and held it out. A federal warrant for the arrest of this woman for theft of government documents from the Harrow County office. James took it and read it fully, twice. It was real. The judge's signature was genuine. The charge was technically accurate, in the narrowest sense. Nadi had taken a document without the clerk's authorization, and the fact that the clerk worked for Wrath, and the document was rightfully hers to access, changed nothing about the letter of the warrant. If James handed her over, the survey went into custody with her. From custody, it went to the county office. From the county office, it went to Wrath, where it would not be destroyed. That was too risky even for him, but simply misfiled, buried under a classification that required an authorization he would never grant. James looked at Edmund Wrath and understood the whole architecture of the trap, built in under an hour, which meant Wrath had been ready for this contingency long before today. Under what authority? James said slowly. Does a territorial land agent execute a federal warrant? I have the authority of my office. Your office authorizes surveying and registration under the Territorial Land Act of 1866. Executing a federal warrant requires a federal marshal, or someone specifically deputized by a federal court. Are you deputized, Mr. Wrath? Wrath's lawyer started to answer. James cut him off without raising his voice. I'm asking Mr. Wrath. The marshal will be here within the hour, Wrath said, and left with his lawyer trailing behind him. The moment the door shut, Nadi was moving, out the back of the livery, through the alley, gone. James spent the next 58 minutes doing exactly what he'd promised, methodically, legally, without a single wasted motion. A formal dispute registered at the county office over the legality of the access refusal that led to the warrant. A request for 2 weeks of county access logs, which he sat and waited 22 minutes for, watching the clerk stall on purpose and refusing to leave until it was in his hands. A formal request at the administrator's office for review of the warrant's underlying authorization. Every single step legitimate. Every single step required a written response. Every response took time, and time was the only thing James had left to give her. Wrath found him on the street at the 40-minute mark, fury banked down under total control. You're obstructing a federal warrant. I'm exercising my legal right to file a dispute and request records. Both of those are legal. Wrath said nothing else. He didn't have anything else to say that wouldn't expose exactly why he needed this to move faster than the law allowed. The marshal arrived at 58 minutes, a tired, competent man named Briggs who had clearly stopped having personal opinions about his warrants a long time ago. Where is she? I don't know her current location. That's an interesting answer from a man seen leaving the livery with her 2 hours ago. People move. They stood on the street in a silence that neither man could rush, both of them waiting on the same thing from opposite ends of it. The rider came from the east at a pace that told James everything before he arrived. Urgency, not dread. He handed the marshal a document. The marshal read it, looked at Wrath, and handed it over without a word. It was a federal stay order, signed by Commissioner Ward himself, halting the Apache relocation immediately, pending investigation into 2 conflicting surveys of the same land filed 17 years apart. It ordered every relevant document preserved. It suspended Edmund Wrath from his post, effective immediately. And in the dry procedural language of federal paperwork, it noted the investigation had been opened based on documentary evidence presented in person by a territorial resident, which was the closest the government would ever come to writing down what one woman had done by riding 31 miles alone and refusing to let go. The warrant is suspended, the marshal said, pending federal review. That order has no authority to suspend a warrant signed by a territorial judge, Wrath said. Commissioner Ward's federal authority supersedes territorial authority in land office matters. The marshal folded the warrant away, looked at James. She reached him. She rode hard. The marshal turned to Wrath one last time. You're suspended, effective immediately. Don't leave the territory pending review. Noddy rode back into Harrow as the light was going gold, and then rose, and then that deep blue that comes right before full dark. The whole high desert lit up briefly, like it knew exactly how beautiful it was. She and James sat together at the boarding house table while she told him what Ward had said after studying both surveys for 10 unhurried minutes. This one is genuine, and this one is not, and I have been doing this long enough to know the difference by the paper alone. When does the stay expire? James asked. It doesn't. It holds until the investigation concludes. That was the only answer that mattered. Everything else was simply process now, running on its own time, from a position Wrath could no longer touch. He loaded his horse the next morning while Harrow was still deciding what kind of day it wanted to be. Noddy came to the livery, stood in the doorway with the morning light behind her. My father will want to know your name. He doesn't need my name. He needs that document to stay safe until this is finished. It will be. She was quiet for a moment. Why did you stand up in that saloon? You didn't know me. James checked the girth strap once, then again, not because it needed it, but because his hands needed something to do while he found the right words. I knew enough, he finally said, and put his foot in the stirrup, and rode west out of Harrow without looking back. 2 miles out, a rider came up fast behind him. Young, Apache, maybe 17, on a horse that knew this country by heart. The rider drew alongside just long enough to press a folded scrap of paper into James's hand, then peeled away east and was gone before he'd even opened it. 3 words, written in a hand he didn't know. He only needed to read them once. We remember you. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it inside his coat, against his chest, and rode on into the open country, with the road behind him leading back to Harrow, and 30 miles further west, 30 families still standing on the land their grandparents had lived and died on, because one woman had refused to let go of a piece of paper, no matter what it cost her to hold it. If this story stayed with you, if Noddy holding that document against her chest through everything meant something to you, if 3 words scrawled on a folded scrap of paper felt like exactly the ending a man like this deserved, hit subscribe right now, because this channel exists to tell the stories that never made it into any official record. The Noddys who rode 31 miles alone for their people. The fathers who trusted their daughters because their daughters could carry what needed carrying. The strangers who stood up in saloons because what they were looking at had a name, and that name demanded a response, no matter who else in the room had already decided it didn't. These people were real. They still are. And every single week this channel finds another one and tells it exactly the way it deserves to be told. Subscribe, hit the bell, and we'll see you in the next one.